also work with land campaigning. And Beijing wants a Beijing carbon forest fund. Plus, they also have their water transfer. So what's interesting for us for that is that could be actually in a landscape where you're stacking and bundling payments for ecosystem services, and you could have carbon, you could have water payments, and who knows what else.
I think I'm going to start because we're webcasting, and then we'll just other people come. We've got more people coming, but
yeah, we have a video at the beginning, so that might help as well.
Okay.
Lots of things going on.
Hey there. Good morning, everyone. The true, the faithful, the early risers on Monday morning. I can't remember the last time I had a Monday morning meeting. But you guys get to take an extra scone. Okay. My name is, as most of you know me here, so I feel kind of silly doing it. But my name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum. Coming up in a couple months, 11 years at the Wilson Center. China Environment Forum will turn 13 in a couple months as well. Where over my tenure in particular, we focused a lot on environmental NGOs, both international and Chinese, and that's why I'm always really excited at these meetings because, well, in the last 6 months or so, we've been doing, many of you know, a lot of heavy focus on U.S.-China energy cooperation, which is good. It's a very important topic. But I feel like I'm coming home when I start talking with folks that work in the NGO community. And today's topic, we've got both a Chinese and international NGO that work on forestry issues in China, which clearly has a strong climate linkage. Not that that's the only reason that we preserve forests, right? And so what we have today is that we have 3 representatives from the Chinese NGO Shanshui Conservation Center, Mountain Water. I like that one, that title too. And my old friend, hope she doesn't mind being called an old friend, but I've known you for most of the time I've been here, Dr. Liu Zhi, who is a professor of conservation biology and executive director of the Center for Nature and Society at Beijing University, besides being head of the Shanshui Conservation Center. She's many-headed. As you'll see from the bio that she's had a couple decades worth of experience as both, first of all, being a scientist looking into wildlife, wild panda conservation, worked at NIH here, helped start up WWF's work in China and establish their panda program in Tibet as well. She's been at Harvard and Yale, but she's not snooty-tooty. She's a down-to-earth kind of person here. And she even agreed a few years ago to write a paper together with me, so I was super honored at that. We looked at NGO trends and development in China. So she's going to be giving an intro to her NGO, which was was born out of Conservation International, which she headed for a few years. And so she's going to give the main talk, and her colleague Li Shengzhi and Sun Shan, I guess there's going to be a bit of ping-ponging around them interjecting bits and pieces, which I kind of like. It keeps the audience awake on gray Monday mornings. Dr. Li Shengzhi, as you can see from the bios, he's a field program director of the Shanshui Conservation Center. He's in Sichuan, where he, among his other conservation activities, he also has been leading their work on earthquake relief in the province. He is a leading expert on community-based conservation and integrated development in China, and I'm really honored to meet him. He's our token man here today, too. So it's good to have at least one guy. Now, Sun Shan is the executive director of Shanshui, and she also graduated from Beijing University, where she started her green activism quite young, setting up a university green group. Also, she was a DCite for a while. She was at George Mason University, where she got her MS, and was also at National Institutes of Health up in Frederick. So she was like, I guess we'll still call that DC. And what's interesting, and also I know that during the Q&A I'm going to want to ask her some questions, well, also Liu Zhi, that about this work that Conservation International did on the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Program. It was a huge initiative funded by a lot of the banks, the MacArthur Foundation. And last but never least, we have our international NGO. For many years, I wanted to have Forest Trends come and talk, and I lured them in because Liu Zhi was here. We have Kirsten Canavy. She's the director of the Forest Trade and Finance Program at Forest Trends, and she focuses on policies and trade related to illegal logging and corruption and the role of financial institutions and investment flows that kind of maybe sometimes encourage illegal and unsustainable harvesting practices. Not surprisingly, a lot of her work is taken up with China and Asia. And she's going to, and what I do like about her, though, it's similar to Liu Zhi on the ground experience, that you evidently tromped around in forests when you worked at the U.S. Forest Service in Oregon. So it's not just an abstract thing that she's doing in forests. You know the trees. Maybe hugged a few. All right. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to let Luger take the podium. And your job, oh, and don't forget, anyone who came in late, you can run out and grab some coffee and things, because I want to keep you nourished. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and very glad to come back to DC area to.
You know which one to open.
Yeah. Okay. To show you some of the work we do back in China. We came here for different conferences, of course. We're on the tour. Next stop is in New York. We're actually leaving today. And two colleagues of mine will share this presentation. I'll start first to go over an introduction, but then they will chime in if I missed out anything important. We'll start with a video as entertainment, early morning entertainment. 第一次看见普氏园林是在1999年的时候。那么我记得特别清楚，我早上爬起来，凌晨的时候爬起来，趴在沙丘后面，我们自己的头一冒出这个沙丘，羚羊歘就跑散了。虽然不像熊猫那么知名，濒危的这个状况要比熊猫要严重的多，而且要保护这个物种呢，看起来好像就是人稍微让一点点利益，而这个让的退步的这个空间也不是那么大，也许就能给这个动物，特别濒危的动物有一席生存空间。这个时候开始就这个念头就开始在那个时候酝酿。
Sorry, it's Monday morning.
Yeah.
从2000。
Just leave it small if it gets the caption still. I would just leave it as that. Yeah. Oh.
第一次看见普氏园林是在1999年的时候。那么我记得特别清楚，我早上爬起来，凌晨的时候爬起来，趴在沙丘后面，我们自己的头一冒出这个沙丘，羚羊歘就跑散了。虽然不像熊猫那么知名，濒危的这个状况要比熊猫要严重的多，而且要保护这个物种呢，看起来好像就是人稍微让一点点利益，而这个让的退步的这个空间也不是那么大，也许就能给这个动物，特别濒危的动物有一席生存空间。这个时候开始就这个念头就开始在那个时候酝酿。从2000年以后呢，这个地方开始建立围栏，又增加了新的威胁。就那个时候呢，我们就想说，除了要了解这些羚羊在什么地方，它们有多少，它现在分布区有多大以外，我们还要特别注意了解说他们面临的威胁究竟是什么。所以那个时候呢，和这些科学家一起呢，把全部可能的普氏园林生活的地方都调查了一遍。那么就发现呢，它现在有10个种群，它差不多10个种群，而这10个种群呢，各自情况不太一样。总的来说呢，是仍然处于一个下降的这么一个趋势。现在看起来有1000只左右。分布在这10个区域，隔离开了10个区域。现在这个物种面临非常紧迫的现实，一个呢是它数量已经下降的非常少，现在这个物种只剩下1000只了，它的繁殖个体可能不到500只，所以它现在可能已经是处在一个不能维持长期生存的这么一个状况。它面临的另外一个特别严峻的情况呢，就是它的分隔，种群之间的分隔。如果说种群太小，比如说像这个只有几只，它慢慢变成一个近亲繁殖的一个种群，这样的话，种群的灭绝几乎就成为一个不可避免的事实。 现在捕食园林面临的最严峻的一个威胁呢，其实就是和生活在这个地区的老百姓的一种竞争的关系，对草场的竞争，对生存空间的竞争。当草不够吃的时候，它没有可能跳到另外一个地方去吃，那么或者它在跳的过程中间呢遇到伤害，直接被这个围栏上的铁丝网有刺丝的这个铁丝网呢挂死。那么这是对捕食园林的一个直接的一个危害。第二个呢，就是我们青藏铁路的一个支线从青海湖边上通过，那么直接呢把这个捕食园林的基地划成两半。那目前呢，由于这个铁路它有比较高的防护栏，这两边的羚羊是不能够来回交流的。对于围栏而言，我们确实要更加详细的了解说，在具体哪一个地方，哪些围栏是最优先需要被拿掉的。所以我们现在有心里比较有数，说要把哪些围栏先去掉。首先呢，其实具体做起来可能并不是那么复杂，比如说围栏的高度是一个问题。围栏低一点，它的目的呢，建围栏的目的是为了防止东家的羊窜到西家的草地去，而捕食园林呢是可以跳得比较高的，所以我们现在采取的第一个这个保护的行动的这个就是把这个围栏降低。还有很重要的呢，就是它的围栏最上面那一层往往是一个有刺儿的铁丝网，那把这一层去掉是非常关键的，因为这层铁丝网造成了直接的对捕食园林的伤害。
在这项目设计的前期，
那么从2007年开始呢，山水自然保护中心开始跟这个当地的林业局、青海省林业局以及当地的青海湖自然保护区来合作。这个活动呢，主要是跟当地老百姓协商，就是在哪家哪户开始来拆围栏。青藏铁路在做这个藏羚羊的迁徙的时候是做了很多考虑的，但当时大家对捕食园林可能都不是太了解。那么客观上呢，就把捕食园林原来是一群，那么这两边呢就给它隔离开了，实际上。那么现在既然我们有了这个知识呢，我们可以跟这些部门反映，他们也很愿意听。那么想法是说呢，这个在铁路上面建一个通道，就是铁路两边有一个足够宽的一个像一个堆成一个小山包一样的这个火车呢，从下面钻过去。那么捕食园林呢，在没有这个火车跑的时候，它可能特别是晚上的时候，这个来回的这种穿越应该不构成这个阻力。就是从长期来看呢，整个青海湖边的这个草场是处在一个退化的这么一个状况下，就是说这个草场上可能容纳不下那么多的又加捕食园林又加老百姓的羊，这么多羊，这么多动物在那上面生活。那么减少牛羊对老百姓来说是一个什么样的损失呢？要算这个损失，这个是两个方面来算的，实际上老百姓自己要算，我们也要来算，政府也要来算。那么在这个大家算的这个账里面得到一个平衡点，就是要找到这个人、草原和捕食园林之间的一个平衡。 Okay. The work obviously we do not only limited in the forest area. The video just showed the piece of work we've done around the Qinghai Lake, which is the rangeland. I'd like to show today what we have as an NGO, as a Chinese NGO, as Jennifer just mentioned, NGO that grew out of international NGO, what our role is in Chinese society, especially in the conservation work. So I will go through this, the outline. We talked about a little bit about the environmental NGOs today in China, and overall background, where China is moving toward, and how an NGO could play a role in pushing forward an integration of environment and development. I will raise a few cases, demonstrate a few cases to show how things happen on the ground. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit how we view ourselves when an NGO, a conservation NGO, see ourselves as successful in China. Well, first, there was a survey done in 2008 when Jennifer and I wrote about this article on NGO green movement in China. It was in 2006. So this is an updated report data on NGOs in China. There are about 400,000 social groups, which among them more than half are government-run NGOs. We used to call them NGOs. Among them, the grassroots NGO, which is initiated by people, are the ones that we think will play a bigger and bigger role in future in China. Although those NGOs are still in a very starting up stage. There are about 500 of them, usually small in size, not much, without much funding and capacity, mostly focusing on advocacy work in cities. So few of them actually work on the ground in the field, especially in the remote mountains on biodiversity conservation. And there are large international NGOs. Essentially, I think most of the large international conservation NGOs have a branch in China, including Forest Trend. But in total size, it takes a small percentage. Although their funding and capacity is much higher than the grassroots ones. We decided to become independent as a Chinese NGO, partly because we think that the changes in China has to be I think the international help is very, very useful and very important. But on the other hand, the grassroots development is essential. If we could make some contribution based on our years of training, working with international NGOs, we probably can. We'll have as a Chinese citizen, we think that is very satisfactory. There is a rapid growing philanthropic community in China, private foundations, for example. But these foundations mostly focusing on disaster relief, education, and poverty. Conservation is something new, so we felt that while we grow ourselves and increase our own understanding toward China's situation, rural situation, biodiversity situation, we also have a responsibility to train, to nurture the donors, appropriate donors to grow with us. So that's the basic status. Basically, grassroots NGOs are still at the beginning stage, as well as the philanthropic community, to support environment work in China? Well, where we are and where we want to be. This is what's so-called Kuznets curve. This is a demo of Kuznets curve, environment curve, to show that when countries become richer and richer, when they accumulate wealth, the consumption of resource per capita has a U-shaped curve, which was a trajectory of Western world, developed countries. China currently, to compare with those developed countries, still per capita GDP is still low. We want to be here as well, richer, healthier, cleaner, everything is good. However, we are actually taking pretty much a U.S. shape trajectory. U.S., of course, it still remained high. Now it should be going down. However, with Chinese population, size of the population, the natural resource wouldn't allow China actually to go reach the level, the plateau that U.S. has reached. So we have to have early tipping. That's the reality. Fair or not, it's a reality. But how? Everybody likes the idea to be wealthier and cleaner, but how? If you ask economists, they always say environment is an externality. Taking care of the environment is an externality. So current economic system doesn't really count the damage of biodiversity and ecosystem and the cost of that, and the pollution, impact of pollution. So if you only count the middle part, how much cash you invested and how much money you make, profit you make out of the business, this may never happen. This early tipping may never happen. So things has to be changed. There are ways, I think. First of all, technology. People always count on technology. It does help to improve the efficiency. And with awareness increase, laws and policies also pressure from externally that the consumption of resources, energy, and natural resources can bring down and the efficiency improved. However, the ultimate change comes from internal. It's the demand, how people want or not want, right? Overconsumption is right or wrong, good or bad. It's a value judgment. If that could be changed, it is a long-term, sustainable change. However, immediate benefits is needed. So we need to figure out how to make environment protection, how to make conservation beneficial to people who does conservation, who are involved in conservation, like the communities we just talked about. And this value change, this change of economy eventually will influence the science, technology, and the laws and policy. So this is the overall background we want to work on, especially the demand side. This part is what we're focusing on. Well, talking about shanshui, I think the changing demand, it's necessary to bring up the equity. Equity between nature and humans, tradition and modern, bottom-up perspective and top-down perspective are the essential ones. And our role is really to experiment, network, and motivate such a change, trigger the early tipping. And 坐而论道, we do it, we work on the ground and mobilize changes. Demonstrating, I think a lot of people would agree that we want to go that far. We want to go to the better well-being with integrating environment concerns and good development, healthy development. But how is the question? So Shanxui's essential role is to demonstrate how. And along with that, nurturing leadership, people is centric. Well, where we work, it is based on science. We our own background are from scientific background, so we worked with species a lot. And the species composition of the species formed ecosystem, which is essential for human survival. So species as an indicator of a healthy ecosystem are of concern to us. This is a map that shows you 600 endangered species in China, where they are concentrated, where they distribute. So overlay of 600 species distribution. So you clearly see that southwest China is a concentrated area, along with Tibetan Plateau. Also, Tibetan Plateau is a headwater of 7 larger rivers in Asia, which nurtures over 4 billion people, about 40%, half of the more than half of the world population. And all these habitats are last remaining ones, such as the panda. The panda had gone through a dramatic retreat of their distribution from fossil age to historical time, like 200 years ago. Now they distributed into very narrow range, these dark spots. So every species essentially had gone through what panda had endured. A forest, finally talking about forest. This is the distribution of forests in China. As you may see that the good forest, which is dark pieces, very rare, very fragmented. Actually, these are more of planted forest. Only natural forest probably only left in southwest and Tibetan Plateau, this area. We also used remote sensing tools to assess where the changes happened. The green areas are where the increased, what we call enhanced vegetation index from 2000 to 2009, which is after China's logging ban. The increase shows the quality of the vegetation actually increased, but the red spots shows you that forestry being degraded. So we need to understand, we're doing a survey to understand where it's supposed to be good, not actually good, what's the reason. This on this map also shows the protected areas. So you may see that whether protected areas make sense, actually played a role to actually make the vegetation better. Assessing the effectiveness of protected areas is another project we're doing, assigned by Ministry of Finance. While talking about protected areas, most of protected areas were established after 2000, and without proper staffing and proper baseline. Here shows the basic situation. China is very progressive in establishing protected areas, with about now more than 15% of countries' terrestrial land designated as protected areas, which is above the world average, which is probably also reached the upper limit of how much country can protect as protected areas. However, few have clear boundary and good staffing and adequate resources. So that is what we are facing. We're still assessing, doing the surveys on this assessment. Based on all this background, where things work, where things more important, we've decided to focus our efforts on Southwest China and Tibetan Plateau. Here's what Yunnan, Sichuan, Gansu, Qinghai, Tibet are the main areas we work. And there are several species of concern. Panda, of course, snow leopard, Przewalski gazelle, the film you just saw, are the main focus species. Well, we're talking about protected areas. Clearly, protected areas alone cannot sufficiently protect the ecosystem in China. Here's an example. Taking pandas distribution as an example, the green area is the protected areas, but the red dots are where the pandas are individually. So you see still a large chunk of those important habitats left out of protected areas. Yet increasing protected areas even more has been difficult in past few years because local government has concerns of taking too much resources from their counties, for example. So the next step is to mobilize communities to work as a main conservation force. But why would they do that? First of all, these local communities do have concerns about the environment because they're home. If forest is cut, landsliding would directly affect their fields and houses, this is a knowledge everybody has. So protecting environment is of their own interest. And also in Western China, there are many ethnic groups, such as Tibetan people. They have the traditional culture, the religion, has the same teaching. Respect life, respect nature. They even give nature different. Every piece of land is given the feature of life that's been respected. So sacred lands, sacred holy waters are an important conservation methodology, traditional methodology, which may be integrated into the modern system. So based on this understanding, we work together with the local governments to authorize the communities for managing land and protecting land. But in the same time, their economic benefits has to be concerned. We first worked on the market-based payment for ecosystem services, and then trying to see how these small-scale demonstration sites could be integrated into the large-scale government scheme, such as National Forest Ecosystem Compensation Program, which is countrywide. Government program has been working on forestry or reforestation for over a decade. That has set up a very good stage that making conservation, making forest as a priority to protect, that conceptually is accepted. But how to really making this investment beneficial to people and beneficial to conservation? Actually, the payment brings back the ecological services, appropriate ecological services has been vague. So our project means to provide examples, methodology to the government program. So here are some examples. We talked about sacred land. This is one Tibetan sacred land. After the large-scale logging operation, there are still good forests left in Western China, such as this one. And sacred land protection has been documented, recorded in the traditional system, and practiced by people and trained. Even kids started from young age start to receive this training. So value, the imprint of such a value has been deeply rooted. We also did surveys on the traditional culture, see how that relates to actual result of conservation, the biodiversity richness, and clearly you see the coincidence where the traditional culture is rich, the species richness also is higher. Mobilizing people is essential because as an NGO, you come and go. Whether you're international or Chinese, you come and go, and it's the people who will live there in their land forever. So here's an example how the local protection could be effective. This is this picture shows local lama, is a Tibetan monk who is very interested in the bird watching since he was young. So gradually he became interested in also drawing bird pictures, trained himself as a naturalist. So we discovered him and helped him to organize his field work into more scientific format. So he's doing a very intensive monitoring on biodiversity and changes over time in his hometown. Here's what he documented. In 1984, you have glacier that provides water to high altitude meadow as to serve as summer grazing pasture, and then lower around the lake it is winter grazing where the people live. With over time, you see the changes that glaciers melting and grassland degrading and people's movement pattern also been changed. Let's go quickly. First, the summer grazing pasture further degraded. So summer grazing is no longer adequate. People move to winter pasture even in summer, during the summer. In the same time, the whole overall the climate becomes drier and glacier melting, warmer. As a result of a more intense population in the winter grazing ground, the grazing ground becomes degraded as well. And the result of that is the land cannot hold so many people. So people had to figure out what elsewhere to go, and a livelihood changed also. And this is the current situation. And if nothing is done, the situation may go worse and worse. And maybe 20 years later, there's no adequate grassland for people, and only mountains as a monument. Lakes will be dried out too. He hand draw these pictures. He's an artist, also a scientist, self-trained. So this kind of documentation would provide a profound understanding to the things happen on the ground, which also closely related to the livelihood of people locally. Of the concern, because of such concerns, he formed an environment NGO and teach people to document and also educate people what appropriate behavior is to around grazing and around taking care of the wildlife in this area. Also integrating the scientific knowledge into the whole education. Here's another example in the Three River in Yushu area, which is where the devastating earthquake just happened. Luckily, our partners in this area have not been directly affected, but several people had their families, victims in their families. So we had a very intensive relief effort in past few weeks. We'll continue to work with people to reconstruct their lives, and also in taking care of the environment. First of all, the reconstruction doesn't further degrade the environment, and also maybe there is a chance to really reconstruct some of the activities around the already degraded environment, so the environment could recover. Here's another example. People authorized by the reserve to take care of 4,000 square kilometer sacred land, and they've also formed a voluntary NGO on the ground. Well, people would like to conserve, protect their land, but it doesn't mean that people should not get benefit from economically from the land. Here's new ways of getting benefit. In the Panda area, this land has been logged for many years because the local villages needs fieldwood and construction timber. The plan is to restore this forest back as a panda habitat. In the meantime, the trees will provide material. Branches can be grounded, so the material could be used to grow mushroom, which could be sold in Japan as an income. Bees raised also if flowers come back, so to harvest honey as an additional income. Of course, this trees absorbs carbon dioxide that reduces the greenhouse gas. And because of the Kyoto Protocol, because of the climate convention and the movement concerns about climate, increased awareness of climate change, this carbon dioxide becomes a tradable item, even they grow in trees. So people grow trees, plant trees, or protect forests could get income from storing carbon dioxide if science, the numbers could be provided through appropriate methodology. And this forest is also a watershed. In Panda area, this forest provides water, clean water for many local towns, and eventually run into the Yangtze River, which is one of the main living water for China. So getting payment from downstream water user is another methodology to show the value of forest, and also to pay for people who protect the forest, so people get payment out of protection directly, not to say tourism and other incomes around this forest. Of course, legislation and the market has to be in place, and that involves awareness. And so all this policy, law, and market should be in line. We are still at the early stage, and these things are not exactly there yet. That's why you need first to lay out some demonstration to show how things work. If the policy comes along, typically in China, policy change happens overnight. So when you have this policy changes, you've got to have methodology in hand. Otherwise, the money could be paid without getting appropriate result back. So far, we have done several CDM certified projects for carbon sequestration. Here's a number: about 4,000 hectares, which can absorb about 800,000 tons of carbon dioxide in 20 years, benefiting about 20,000 farmers. This is supported by Conservation International. Also, the water payment, we set up 2 funds, as I mentioned, and these models will be sold to the government. And we start to receive some feedback from the government. Qinghai Forestry is working, they have a payment compensation for forest program. And they studied our results and decided they would like to do a direct contract with local farmers for this payment, to be able to receive better results on ecosystem functions. Well, talking about climate, of course, only the carbon forest and the community is not enough. It involves larger community to larger society to engage, especially Chinese businesses. So being aware of that needs, we start to build a broader circle of friends that we consider as a social capital to conservation. We may not have direct, immediate return to Shanshui. It doesn't have to be payback to Shanshui, but payback to the China's environment and the global environment. For example, we took a group of business people. This is Wang Shi in the middle, who is one of the largest private real estate developer in China, along with his colleagues, other real estate developers, to Copenhagen and expose them with the overall trend and needs and the possible opportunities, possible constraints and opportunity for Chinese businesses operating in next decades. And these people are the reason why they want to come is they are already interested in the subject. And after they went back, they formed a real estate alliance to enforce carbon disclosure, trying to enforce carbon disclosure and make commitment, or more forward commitment than what government has regulated. So there is actually at Copenhagen, they constantly talk to Chinese governmental delegation to reassure them that Chinese government's promises, the obligation, the commitment was okay. They can fulfill it. They don't have to worry, because the government delegation was also concerned that these commitments they declared at the meeting causing negative feedback from Chinese people. But these business people actually went forward, say, we're delighted the government made such commitments, so we have a reason why we can be more environmentally forward. More forward. So finally, even NGOs often criticize that we don't measure our successes. We just do what we think right, but afterwards, at the end of the day, we don't know what happened. We have to know what happened. I think at this point, we focus on 4 areas which we think will have to achieve. Otherwise, would feel very worried about ourselves. Do anything before we do anything. After we do anything, we have to know scientifically if it's appropriate, the right place, the right target, and afterwards, if the changes ever happened, and if the community. Local community ever actually be part of it. And finally, if a conservation project, any conservation effort can sustain, the local community has to be economically sustained. So the incentives are essential. These incentives has to be a long-term, whether it's formed through policy or through the market. And finally, what we work on is essentially around people. Without people, nothing could happen. Nothing could survive after the project phase ends. So what we do has to be turned around to be what local people do, with all the support from the economic support and the change of value. So that's how we view ourselves as successful. Thank you.
Great.
Anything I left out?
Okay, thank you.
You want to change it?
Well, that was a really great, I like that, great snapshot of what they're doing. And I know you have a bunch of questions, but I think we'll let Kirsten, you want to leap on up? Yeah. And as I've often said in the email I sent out, that international NGOs, while a low percentage, as noted by Lu Zhi, they have in many ways been behind a lot of the capacity building in Chinese, and also not just Chinese NGOs, but government agencies and government research centers in China. And I've seen over the years that, and I think even Lu Zhi and I think we wrote about this in our chapter, in State of the World in 2006 that international NGOs have often been kind of a glue that have brought together diverse groups in China to work together. And I think that what we're seeing now with Liu Zhi is, and other Chinese NGOs, is they know too that they can also be the glue. I guess, a nice glue. It lets people go occasionally. All right, forest trends. You can tell me if you think you're glue or not.
We would like to be glue, yes. And we would like to have more partnerships. We are a small NGO. We're based here in Washington, D.C., but thanks to modern technology, we actually have a lot of our staff telecommuting. So we have 2 staff in China, 1 in Hanoi. But we pretty much try to keep small. We believe that staying small helps us be flexible and nimble, allows us to respond very rapidly to opportunities as they arise. And we work primarily through partnerships. So if we may not have a lot of staff, we are able to identify who we think are the experts in certain fields. So when we see an opportunity for a policy brief or policy assistance, who are the experts? In some case, we might want to partner with Shang Shui because we believe they are the best. It's not necessarily the best are always going to be on our staff. And so that's why we do like to keep small. So Jennifer introduced me. I'm Kirsten Canby. I'm Director of Trade and Finance at Forest Trends. I've spent a lot of time in China working more on the dynamics of supply and demand for forest and timber products and the impact that has within China itself as well as in many of the supplier countries. And more recently, I've been broadening out across Asia, working on payments for ecosystem services. And I'm going to be mainly walking through a document that we released about 6 months ago, which looks at markets for ecosystem services in China. It's an exploration of China's equal compensation and other market-based environmental policies. And we got into this work about, in a bigger way, in about 3 years ago, when we were asked to do for the CCI-CED. I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically an international dialogue. Annually, they pick a topic, and in 2006, it was on payments for ecosystem services, and we were asked to provide a summary of international experience with PES, payments for ecosystem services, and what implications that could have on China. What are the lessons learned for China? And it was at that time we really began to realize actually there was a lot going on in China itself, but not a lot of it was being documented, not only within China, but also definitely the international community didn't understand. And so there was a lot of lessons to be shared in both directions, actually international to China, vice versa, as well as within China itself. So Michael Bennett is our staff person in China. He wrote this document. I am presenting it on his behalf. I wish he were here because he knows a lot more than I do. So this is the motivation for the work was we began to realize that there was a lot of experimentation happening in China. And in China, a lot of the times the provinces begin to experiment with programs and the national government will sometimes follow. And so there is an interplay between provinces influencing national policy and national policy actually setting up the framework for the provinces to work within. It was relatively undocumented. Many of the programs we found, or Michael found, were not labeled as equal compensation or PES, but they still had PES or market-like characteristics. And most of the research that's been done to date was sector-specific, just on water, just on forests, and therefore they were missing some very important lessons learned that could be shared cross-sectorally. Okay. One of the first things that Michael did was do a Google search on some of the important words like equal compensation mechanisms, as well as combined with words like payments for ecosystem services, and he found tons, more than 1 million, almost 2 million hits on Google, 800,000. There was a lot of information out there. A lot of it was in Chinese. A lot of it was incomplete. So this report, basically we called it the PES inventory. Let's just try to see how much is out there already. And so it was a slog. It took more than a year. And we created a table. It came up with an amazing breadth and scale of programs already involving some form of payments for ecosystem services. We actually came up with $90 billion in existing or planned programs, and I can walk you through in another slide exactly how that number came about. It's actually a conservative estimate. The table in the report goes through the different ecosystem services on the left hand, and then the different programs and policies on the right hand side. So I'll walk you through the different ecosystem services. I'm not going to walk you through all the different program and policies because there are too many. You have to read the report itself. So it went through water quality and quantity service provision, watershed eco-compensation programs. There are many of them, and I'll walk you through some of the specific programs at the national and local levels. Water use rights transfers. There were many forest-related programs. The most famous, the Sloping Land Conversion Program, the Forest Ecosystem Compensation Program. That was at the national level, but then there were also provincial level forest ecosystem compensation programs. And so there are 7 altogether. I haven't listed them. The table goes on. There were programs for soil erosion, eco-agriculture, carbon, including the Clean Development Mechanism, which Lijo went through, emissions trading, and there are trading platforms now being set up for sulfur dioxide as well as carbon, and other programs such as government green procurement. So then now you take those program and policies, such as the watershed eco-compensation programs, bring them over to the left. Now we have a whole table or a whole chapter devoted to what are the programs for watershed eco-compensation. And so we go through all the different programs in Beijing, Fujian. Then there was a summary. A lot of them are fiscal transfers, cross-boundary fiscal transfers, allowing for watershed management upstream for the watershed management costs. We also tried to estimate the size, either in dollars or renminbi, or in how many hectares were being covered by these programs. So then we would do the same thing. There's a whole other chapter on water use transfers. Then there was a whole section on the forest-related programs. So we're not going to walk through them here, but you can go through the report and you can see the amazing number of programs. Right here, there's a series of maps. I'm going to flip through them quickly to show you exactly where these programs are taking place. The watershed eco-compensation programs are in blue, and then we'll go flip quickly through what's happening in each of these provinces, which are in blue. So here's in Fujian province, a lot of these programs in the watersheds. Zhejiang, 4 programs that we found. 1 in Beijing, Hebei. So I'll just go through these quickly. But it shows you that a lot of the stuff is happening in the provinces, at the provincial or the municipal levels. And that was some of the highlights of our report. That was one of the major findings, is that these were some of the programs that were so hard to find that people didn't know about. The central government sometimes didn't know very much details about these programs. And certainly between the provinces was not a lot of information being shared. Some of these are actually very innovative, and I'll discuss some of the findings that we had. You go to water use rights trading. I'll do the same thing, flip through what's happening. Part of this, because I know this was a webinar, so this is going to be, and people can take this document and you can look more closely at each of these programs. And then the provincial forest eco-compensation fund programs initiated in 1998. So. And the methodology, how do we estimate the $90 billion? We looked at program budgets for expected programs, program expenditures to date, and the values of the transactions and the revenues under programs to date. It's important to note this was not a valuation of the ecosystem market transactions, since many programs are both sort of traditional command and control components. They have policy components as well as market-based instruments. And a lot of the numbers were actually not available. So if you go through the tables in the report, there's actually a lot of no information available. So we think this $90 billion is actually a conservative number. What are some of the findings? China has been experimenting with these programs for a lot longer than most people think. The Water and Soil Conservation Law in 1991 set up some of the legal foundations for these kinds of transfers. That one was actually experimented in one of the provinces first and then became a law. And it stipulates farmers can contract marginal, barren, and degraded land in watersheds and have ownership rights over what is produced, with the obligation that they prevent soil erosion. So that's one of the first legal bases for actual transfer for a PES type of program. The green food label started in the 1990s. It's been evolving and improving over time. Water emissions trading experiments started in the late 1980s. Other findings, what we've been calling it the rich mosaic. There are central programs. There are diversity in the ways that local governments are implementing central programs. There are local programs that the provinces and municipalities are developing all on their own. And then there are what we call hybrids, and they draw upon lots of different sources, multiple central and provincial policies as well as funding sources, and they're creating distinct initiatives on their own. And I just pulled out one example in the Xinhua River watershed where there's local water rights trading, downstream development zone policies, funding from the State Forest Administration, as well, and programs such as the Forest Eco Compensation Fund and the conversion of grassland, how about the CCGF and others. So it's a big mix, and so it sort of looks very different from what may be happening in other provinces. So that led us to the question, well, who's actually leading this? Are the local governments being the innovators and then the central government is learning? Or is the central government having their policies and are they leading? And maybe the answer is they're sort of both. They're playing off of each other. I'm highlighting here a few of the very large and well-known central programs and policies that cover the sloping land conversion program, also known as conversion of cropland to forest and grasslands, started in 1999. The Forest Eco Compensation Fund. The 11th five-year plan includes eco compensation policy mention of it. The Ministry of Environmental Protection states that they want to establish eco compensation pilots in many key areas. So all these activities have generated the foundation. They've generated momentum, activity, and discussion at both central and local levels. But then you look at what local government was doing, you see that many of the local government programs actually preceded some of these national policies. So who's leading? Another finding was that a vast majority of both the central and local programs were actually focusing on water, not surprising given the water scarcity in many of the areas. Even forestry programs were directly targeting or having important co-benefits related to water. So the Forest Eco Compensation Program, we found out that more than 80% of the key public benefit forest areas were also in headwaters, watersheds, wetlands, or areas affected by severe soil erosion or desertification. This slide shows that there is actually a geographic concentration of these programs in the coastal areas, which again, maybe is not surprising given the population density in the coastal areas and the fact that the provincial governments often have more funding. So they were able to innovate on their own, had some of their own funding sources. When I get to the section there on recommendations or some of the challenges ahead, I think one of this sort of points out, is it possible that in the coastal areas, the local governments are very capable of taking some of the national guidance and policy programs, implementing on their own, sometimes with their own funding, and maybe the central government should be focusing more in the western areas where there is not as much funding, and the central government could possibly play a larger role. Other findings, private sector involvement has been relatively small. We would like to keep track of private sector involvement in these market-based mechanisms. The government certainly can't fund all these programs forever. Well, they can fund a significant portion of it, but there is a lot more potential funding that could be coming from the private sector. But the good news is that all these different programs that have been happening already, they set the foundation. It is not a new concept. And a lot of these programs are domestically driven. They are they start in the provinces or national, and very few of them have had outside funding. Such, I think CI has been involved, the World Bank's been involved, but the majority of these are domestically driven. So the opportunities and challenges that that came out of this inventory, and I'd like to say there is so much work that could be done on this. This inventory just told us what's happening out there, and some of these findings are just sort of broad. Okay, this is what we can see just by the fact that this is where certain things are happening and what the focus has been on. But there's so much more work that could be looking at what are the actual impacts of these programs. We haven't gotten into that. That would take many more years. If you want to look at the actual environmental impacts, you need baselines, etc. But what are the environmental impacts, the social impacts? What have the fiscal impacts been? We could spend a lot of time on that. So some of these are just these are what we found from this very initial survey, what we call phase 1. Now we want to get into phase 2. There has been a little bit of a fixation on trying to find exactly what is the value of this ecosystem. In some case, when you're dealing with payments or market-based mechanisms, you don't have to know the exact value. You just need to know what is the willingness to pay and the willingness to change your behavior. So there could be more focus on designing the institutions or the policy and regulatory frameworks that allow for payments to be arrived at efficiently via negotiations between the service provider and the buyer. The role of the government could also focus more on how do you create the policy frameworks that allow flexibility to adapt to changing situation, allow for incentives for innovation and prices that to identify resource bottlenecks. How can the national government make sure that you allow for that flexibility? Given that the local governments are so involved in this, how do we make sure that national policies do not crowd out local innovation for local governments to implement their own programs and policies, or these hybrids, which has already led to a rich diversity of implementations which we should be learning from? We at Forest Trends work a lot on markets for ecosystem services, and we always say that markets are not a substitute for regulation. It needs to be a nice mix, complementary mix of both. And there's always a potential of rent-seeking behavior. Are you sure that local governments are looking at the central funding in order to affect change, or is it they're just looking for more resources for their region? I already mentioned the geographic concentration for coastal areas and the possibility that the national government might want to focus a little bit more on the western areas where the provinces are a little bit less able to innovate on their own. There are overlapping programs. The ministries and government agencies may not necessarily be talking to each other very well. The Ministry of Environmental Protection now is a ministry on its own, and it does look like the NDRC, the National Development Reform Commission, which is sort of a super ministry, and China will be taking a lead on eco-compensation policies, and so that might be a way for cross-sectoral lessons learned and policy cohesiveness. Property rights are key to PES, but I think in many parts of the world, as well as in China, we also might be finding that these types of programs may actually become the foundation for negotiations on property rights. So it's not that property right, in many cases, property rights do have to be securely established before some of these payments can happen, but in some cases the policies come, and then actually that is the platform for discussions and the transfer of rights. As I mentioned before, right now we want to continue to develop and deepen this inventory. We'd like actually a local partner, to be able to help us keep this inventory going. A lot has happened already in the years since this research was done. We would like to deepen our analysis on this, such as what are these impacts, getting more deep, asking specific questions about what exactly is happening. Michael Bennett is working with the NDRC and the ADB to inform the development of national guidelines for eco-compensation. And we would like to use the results to identify and bring together policymakers and practitioners from across China. We do something called the Katoomba Group, which is an international forum for exchanging experience with PES and market instruments for environmental services. And we think China is so big and there is so much experience within China itself. There's a lot of lessons to be learned within China itself. So while we might want to bring in some international experts from other parts of the world, we think that an inter-China Katoomba Group meeting would be a fascinating idea. And that's it for right now. The report can be found at our website, which is www.forest-trends.org, or you could just Google Forest Trends China Eco Compensation, and you'll find our report with all the list of all the fantastic things that have been happening in China. Thanks.
Yay. Thank you so much. So why don't you guys move up to the front? I think it's a perfect example, and I'm sure that a perfect example of an international organization doing a study that many people know. I fancy that Lujer has already looked at that report, seeing that you guys are interested in payment for environmental services. All right. I'd like you guys to ask some questions. So Ada will hand the mic to folks, and just say your name and affiliation, where you hang out, so they know where you're coming from.
I'm Helen Raffel, Resources for the Future. I'm
Can you speak directly to the mic? We can't hear you. Sorry. Is it on? Yeah, just hold it straight up.
Straight up.
Close to your mouth, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm extremely encouraged by what's happening in China and the preservation and reforestation of the forests. And it's particularly important, of course, in China itself because of the spreading deserts and the water shortages and so forth. But I'm not very encouraged from a worldwide point of view, and I wish there were more examination of Chinese imports of lumber. In particular, Indonesia is being deforested. I've also worked in Indonesia as well as in China. And the illegal destruction of forests and shipment of lumber to other countries, in particular on a large scale to China, sort of negates the preservation of the trees in China when they are using destruction of trees in Indonesia and other parts of the world to meet their needs for lumber. So I wonder if any international studies, or even in China for importation of lumber, has been looked at all.
I think that's a forest trend question. Also, keep in mind too that it's these timber products are ones that we are buying here, right? You know, so that's, I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's a global supply chain. I fancy, Kirsten, this is like. You don't have to push anything. It's always on.
It's always on. Okay.
It's always on. So
Watch
don't whisper anything.
I could give a whole nother presentation on exactly this topic. We have been working for at least 6 years on, I think I mentioned this earlier, the dynamics of the supply and demand of wood products in China. And so when you talk about the supply, it's what China produces itself, which after the floods there was a logging ban, and so all of a sudden the increase in imports to China to feed the not only domestic demand, but the export demand, the demand from the U.S. and the EU. So we began to try to track, well, where is China buying from? How much is it able to produce itself? And where is it actually going to? And so it is very true that a lot of the wood products, the hardwoods, the fancy hardwoods that are coming from Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, are what are produced into veneers and actually going out through the export market to India, to EU, and the U.S. But one area where a lot of groups are now working on is the EU and the American markets. There's a new Lacey Act here in the U.S., and the EU is going to do another similar law to the Lacey Act, which you could actually be criminally prosecuted for importing wood that could be proven as illegally harvested. And that is having an impact on the export industry in China, the manufacturers, because they could actually see some of their markets closing down. But we have done some modeling efforts with the University of British Columbia that's actually, that's good, that's fine, there will be some impact, but we do need more advocacy for domestic markets within China itself. And so that's why it's so heartening to see some of the advocacy NGOs in China growing up to be able to start working with businesses in China itself on green procurement for businesses and possibly even government itself.
I just want to add a few words on that. And obviously the Chinese government also realized it's an issue. But now the timber import, the business is run by so many private businesses. It's hard to, go after each one of them. there has been a bilateral agreement between Chinese and Indonesian government on against illegal logging, but implementation is really a difficulty. During the APEC meeting, I guess a couple of years ago, President Hu Jintao also made a suggestion to have a sustainable forest dialogue among APEC countries. So there is a platform that's been built in China in association with all the neighboring countries. That's first step. I think implementation also involves the resource countries. There are a lot of corruption obviously involved in those illegal logging. So it's a heavy task. But I do see that Chinese businesses are making progress. I just a couple of weeks ago I ran into a company leader who operates in Brazil on forest products, and he made a presentation on how they followed the international standard on sustainable logging and how they communicate and interact with local NGOs and local government and local communities. I think there are good examples are coming.
Actually, I want to follow that with your comment that you talked about how the business angle, Chinese businesses, which again, there are a lot of private sector ones, and the fact that you took some Chinese business folks, real estate people to Copenhagen. And I'm kind of curious if you could talk, maybe you or your colleagues can talk a little more about, you work at both the community level, but now you're making these linkages to businesses. How are businesses related to your, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with the Chinese businesses in your conservation work.
Sure. Then before that, on business, I'd also like to say that Lu Zhu talked about a tipping point, and I think what a tipping point means for China is also an awareness of its citizens, of the consumers, especially within a very condensed 30 years of development. You get rich quickly, but how you spend that wealth, what it means to be rich. Purchasing expensive food in the domestic market is very similar to consuming shark's fin, consuming wildlife. It's the same mentality that what you should do after you get rich. So I think a very important role that is part of the reason we're working with the private business in China, because these are the people who are opinion leaders in China. Not only they have a large consumer base, but they also have profound influence in the consumers and the behaviors of the consumers. And these are very, there's a generation of private business leaders who are starting to think about their role in not only in the business, but also in consumers' behavior. And we took this group of entrepreneurs to Copenhagen is among the top tier of the private sector who is thinking about exactly that. They went to Copenhagen and was deeply affected by the international community. They see the action against the action on climate change, and then they came back and started to look at their own business. And even though the government right now doesn't have a very precise regulation to certain levels of emissions of carbon for their business as of yet, but they start to inspect themselves. And one of the example, Lu Zhu was mentioning Vanke, the largest real estate company in China, probably in the world as well, is they have been working with us to look at their timber footprint, where they get their flooring and where they import their products. And so I think it all happened in a very short time, but it's very promising.
Quick question on this the largest real estate company in the world. Do they have, this sounds silly, do they have shareholders? Are they getting pressure from anywhere else besides,
Yeah, they are. They are a public-owned company, and I'm sure it's probably not there yet, but I'm sure they will.
Because that's what we've seen the dynamic with U.S. and European companies. The shareholders put that pressure. The challenge is in China, though, a lot of the it's a mixture of the extractive industries, going outside of China of state-owned and private, state-owned don't have shareholders.
Right. I think it's a matter of time. It's the consumers' awareness and business behavior, and right now it's only starting to see. And what is very good in China is a lot of business leaders, they're not acting out of consumer pressure, but they're now acting out of their own conscience and of the international exposure that a regular consumer probably wouldn't get as of yet.
That's why actually, like in Wang Ke's case, Wang Shi gets pressure from shareholders on slowing down, not the push forward.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the one actually leading this change, sometimes pressured by his shareholders. That's why he was really delighted that government made announcement on carbon emission target. And so his behavior is rationalized within the company.
Cool. Okay, let's at least these guys like wander off on me. Some other questions. We got them down front here. How about we start with Jing? We'll go with you and then you. Jing in front. Okay, wait. You have to get the mic though because we are webcasting. You can project, but not that well.
Sure. Jing Liu from Vermont Law School. I have two questions for Dr. Liu and your colleagues, Shanshui. The first one is regarding what type of law and policy-oriented work does Shanshui do? Because it seems that Shanshui runs very successful grassroots, on-the-ground type of work, and it sounds natural to just summarize this experience and contribute to the local development of laws and regulations. So I'm just curious what type of law and policy-oriented work Shanshui does. And also my second question is regarding environmental justice. So based on your experience doing on-the-ground work in China, particularly in Western China, do you see there is an environmental justice issue down there? And has there been any campaigns or any kind of efforts addressing environmental justice issues directly? Thank you.
Maybe Shengzhen go first on the law and the policies.
Law and regulations.
Sorry, I have.
Can you translate your question into Chinese? Or you got. Yeah, get the mic so they can.
我就想问，这个关于山水的这个机构是做很多这个在社区这个层面上的一些活动。那么想问一下，就是有没有做跟当地的这个政府或立法的机构合作，从事一些这个推动当地的环境或者是这个自然资源保护的这个法律法规的这样的一种工作？
你把那个 CSP 的
OK.
Okay. So my when you say local government, you mean including provincial government or? Okay. So actually, Sanshui, I think we are doing a lot of demonstration or pilots in Qinghai, Sichuan, Yunnan, in Western. So I think for us, for our own objective, we want to, of course, try to help to improve the Chinese government's regulations and law. But I think it's so. I think for me, my understanding is every activity for us is we will think, hey, how can we, if we do this, how can we improve the law and the regulations? But that's why for Sanshui we do sensitive, we do pilot works, we do sensitive works, but we do together with government. For example, we do conservation. We try to work together with local government, the county forestry departments. We try to encourage county forestry department or nature reserve work together with, as Lu mentioned, with Tibetan monastery monks. So we try to encourage them to do this, and we also try to give them the report, document the process, and try to mention this to the provincial level. So I think, but there, I think we do not of works at the grassroots level, but I think it's long process to influence the provincial government. But on the other hand, it's easy to. There are a lot of activities at the central level. So I think Lu and Sun San did a lot of legislation works together with the People's Congress. But I think now I find I will say there's a gap at the provincial level and the city level if we want to really to influence the law. That's my point.
I just want to add that the way we work to push for the for regulation and policies to show the case, how things might work on the ground, to show the effectiveness, because ultimately concerns for conservation, the results of conservation is of interest of government. So as I mentioned in my presentation, that we mainly demonstrating how.
There is one thing, in China, there is a title. Many local governments want to get a title. For example, call it minority. If an area has a title of minority.
Minority county, minority.
Or minority county. So the county government will get some policy advice, favorite policies. For example, like they will pay less taxi or to the central government. They will get more autonomous. So I think in general, many local governments want to have a title like a minority county or poverty county, because also a poverty county also get favorite policy. For us, for Shanxi, we want to try to encourage local county have a name title of eco county. So usually a eco county is we want to also so our message is a eco county should have the same favorite policies as the poverty county and the minority county. I think that's our objective.
Maybe before we move to the environmental justice one, I wanted to ask about forest trends, your work. You mentioned, Kristen, that forest trends, probably Michael is out there talking to the NDRC about the eco-compensation policy. Can you tell us where that is and kind of link to that? I know that payment for environmental services is, it sometimes my impression has often been that there aren't that many really successful examples of where the payment for environmental services both benefits the people protecting it and the environment. I mean, it seems like the case of in New York with the Catskills is always kind of wheeled on out as the model. And I'm wondering, also when the work with you talking to the government, I mean, are you pointing to successful examples or legislation in other countries on payment for environmental services? I mean,
the work that we did actually for 3 years ago for the CCICD was exactly that, was international experience and how do you bring in local stakeholders, how do you calculate the actual benefit, how do you balance sort of the compensation with the actual need for environmental protection or provision of services. And so we would like to do more of that. That is sort of an essential core of what Forest Trends does, is try to share that experience. So we would like to discuss with the ADB and the NDRC this idea of trying to help bring in international experience into this policy creation process. And I believe there's a large conference in September that might be the forum for that.
So it's not. There's no draft law yet. This is still just the.
I haven't kept track of that. So maybe our colleagues from China would.
Do you think that, because I know that you've worked under CI, you helped them with biodiversity protection law. Do you know where the payment for eco compensation law or regulation is?
There is a national program. Usually, in China, laws and regulations start with a program, nationwide program. Then it could be that if handled well or implemented well, could be evolved into some kind of regulation. And in the 11th five-year plan, there is a large-scale, I think it's revolutionary approach, although not succeeded yet. It's called some functional land zoning, which basically categorizes the country's land into 4 zones: focused development zone, optimized development zone, restricted development zone, and no development zone. So for no development zone and the restricted development zone, you're supposed to get adequate compensation, which is a nationwide compensation scheme. But so far, the plan has been drawn by the NDRC. But scientifically, there are still some issues there. Also, the economical system has not been really lined up to match such a zoning exercise. So I don't think in next couple of years this program, this exercise will be really become a regulation yet. But the groundwork has been going on. I think if that can be done, that would be a very large scale.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the 11th, the plans being the agenda setters, because we saw that like in the 9th and 10th 5-year plans, there was like in different topic, but energy conservation, energy efficiency, and then they really, they nailed it in the 11th 5-year plan, and it happened. So, okay.
So it takes another 5 to 10 years, I think.
Let's be patient, right? Question, now I wanted not to forget Jingjing's question about environmental justice. Yes. Is there an environmental justice component to your work, or are you seeing it just emerging at the grassroots? Yeah.
Well, the reason why we in the beginning I talked about eco-equity. That's a word we sort of created. But we interpret it into 3 layers. One is human nature, because nature can't speak for itself. So there's always a disadvantaged party in these 3 pairs: nature, tradition, and local. It's not. I don't think it's only China's issue. These 3 versus human. A dominant human being and modernization and outside top down forces. In the western part of China, it is indeed that because of the resource capitals mainly come from outside, from east, from elsewhere. The local decisions tend to be, local communities tend to be the less considered parties, while the local communities are actually the ones that actually have a long-lasting concerns to environment. So you do see frictions, contradictions over time, whether it involves mining or dam building or factories. You're building factories in local, not only in Western China now. It's local communities are now more concerned about environment against outside investment, and sometimes that investment is combined with government interest. So there has been a group of legal aid that's going on to help with people, because there are laws to protect the locals' rights. It's the enforcement sometimes very difficult, especially local government is involved. There is a growing voice out, but and also there are a few cases actually. For example, we do have a case in Sichuan Ganzi Prefecture where a holy lake was about to build a dam to emerge the land, and the local people voiced against that. That is a big company, it's Huaneng, China Energy Company. And at the end, local people won because the company canceled that project.
Okay, good. And right there behind.
Hi, I'm Louise Leaf with the International Reporting Project. I have 2 questions, one for Kirsten and one for Shanshui. For Kirsten, the $90 billion figure for eco-compensation sounds great. Have you been able to verify how much of it is a real figure? I know that in many instances, not only in China but elsewhere, there are wonderful plans on the books and they're not actually implemented. And then for Shanshui, I had a question about Sichuan. For the earthquake reconstruction after the 2008 earthquake, it was an opportunity to build in a more ecologically sensitive way, in a very ecologically sensitive area. And you said your specialty is showing on the ground how things can be done. Can you give an example or two of what has been happening in Sichuan in terms of rebuilding from the earthquake in a way that's more conservation-minded? Thanks.
Kirsten, you want to start?
Okay. I think you're right to point out that the numbers are fuzzy. I don't think that this is something that you want to consider a hard and fast number. I pointed out this was coming from documents saying this is what the expected expenditures are, this is what the expenditures have been. In a lot of cases, the figures just were not available. I think the point of bringing out that number, however, is to show you that it's a very large set of programs in China. Even if it was only 50% of that number, it's still 45 billion. So I would take it just as an indication of the scale that China and the local and national governments have been putting into these programs.
Okay, I'll try. I think I can give you two examples. First, a lot of conservation investment from the central government. For example, there are around 30 or 35 nature reserves in the earthquake area. And I think each nature reserve get around several billion, for example, 5 million RMB or even 10 million RMB from the central government to build the conservation stations, conservation structures. So I think a lot of conservation investment, that's after the earthquake. Also, I think no matter there is earthquake or not, the government will invest a lot of infrastructure, I mean, like highway, railway in Sichuan, in a panda habitat. That's a trend. But because of the earthquake, there are much more investment. So because of the huge capital, we can argue, for example, before, without earthquake, because of the limitation of the investment, we can only build a road on top of the mountain, across the mountain. So maybe this will fragment panda habitat. But because of the huge money from the central government, we can build a tunnel, not on the top of the mountain, but we can build a tunnel. So this can really help to reduce the threats from transportation to panda habitat. So I think that's the two cases.
For the railway that's to be built between Chengdu and Lanzhou, 80%, 90% of that railway is it's underground, in the tunnels, through tunnels and bridges. We also managed to push for the local government to set up a nature reserve to avoid passengers from going to the region, which has been an effort we tried for years that local government didn't want. Now with the this railway, the desire for the railway, we managed to prove that nature is already set up by the provincial government.
And so, but to tell
it's a trade-off. You know, you have a railway, better not to build, but if there is such an infrastructure, it can be built in a way that's less destructive and then taking advantage of such a project can expand the conservation area. As Li Sheng just said, we have, because the resource is sufficient.
in the earthquake area, I mean, besides Shanshui doing work, are there a lot of other Chinese NGOs doing work? And
yeah.
Can you tell us one or two about what's happening?
There are many Chinese NGOs working during the earthquake relief and afterwards, helping with setting up new, while constructing new houses and trying to set up different models of houses that's environmentally friendly, or livelihood that could be made more environmentally friendly. I can name a few. One Foundation, for example.
Which one?
One Foundation by Jet Li.
Oh, okay.
Global Village.
Yeah, yesterday you sent an email to Sun Shan, and there are Chinese delegates from Sichuan.
Yeah.
Right.
I think most of this not NGO very active after earthquake in Sichuan.
Yeah. Yeah, we're having it's a closed group. National Committee on U.S.-China Relations is bringing a group around the states for earthquake recovery, and they were just going to come by here and chat with a few people in Mandarin, so we get to work up our Mandarin skills tomorrow. But yeah, so I was just kind of curious because I know some of them are grassroots groups, but there are also a fair number of gongos. I think too. Did you have another comment?
And also there's a trend that I like very much, which is the involvement of social enterprise, sometimes funded by people who have business experience to try to do things not exactly in an NGO way, but in a sustainable, profitable way to help, especially to recovery of local economy. Alibaba, for example, we met with them recently. This is on its way to become probably the largest internet company, but business to business and business to consumer solutions to help promote the local products and ecological products and environment-friendly products is one of the biggest labels they're trying to help to promote from the earthquake region.
Okay, got a question right here in the middle.
Yes. My name is Edward Martin. I'm retired from the World Bank. And my question deals marginally with the environment, and it has to do with the framework under which you're working presently, Sanshui. You claimed at the beginning you were international NGO. If you are international, basically, how is your framework inside China? Have you been Sinicized? Are you remaining foreign-owned? How did you get your integration inside China? Do you get support from the, say, sector ministry or others? That's of importance to many people. How to be able to efficiently work in China and not to be tolerated. Thank you.
Perhaps Christine also can chip in how you work in China.
Yeah.
You want me to talk about my experience with Conservation International?
Yeah. Well, this is a unique. Shanshui, you are a unique model, and I've wondered if we're going to see more of these kind of it's like a. I don't know. CI is reconstituting their work in China. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you guys were formed. I think that kind of fits in with your question, because you're actually a grassroots NGO.
Yeah. We formed Conservation International in 2002, and you mentioned earlier that we, Sun Shan, together we managed this grant to help grassroots NGOs, CEPF, which is also partly funded by the World Bank. I think the work in general was good. We also built a large foundation of partnership through that grant making. However, if you look into the changes over time today in China, the certain areas changed fast, but certain areas not so much change. Supporting NGO is the area that has not been changed that fast as people would wish. That's part of the reason why we would like to become one of the grassroots NGOs. Not that we like to take challenges to give hard time to ourselves.
It would have been easier to stay Conservation International,
of course, financially, and but on the other hand, to make things happen, I think. Local NGOs have more access to many real things. International work group is still having a hard time to be registered, for example, legally registered. It's a long process and not so easy, and the track, the process of that is uncertain, still uncertain. As a grassroots Chinese NGO, then you have many different ways to play around. You don't have to register at the national level. You can register at the city level or even district level, lower level, county level.
Dare I ask, how are you registered?
We're registered in Beijing,
with the university
district
okay.
level. Yeah. So it's easier to find for local groups. It's easier to find what you call mother-in-law. There has to be a government agency responsible for you on your liability. What do you call it?
Well, I mean, what I've noticed though is that a lot of Chinese NGOs that get their popo, their mother-in-law, that in the end, I mean, once they get it, it doesn't seem like the popos ever really play a big role beyond the registration.
But for registration,
what?
Unless you're running into some problems, it can be a threshold.
There can be a threshold, but generally,
But for international NGOs to find that mother-in-law is much more difficult in reality. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the reason, I think that's a chicken egg situation. The reason why the grassroots NGO in China has not been growing so rapidly is because there are so few people would like to become NGO, full-time NGO staff because there's not enough resources. Because there's not enough resources, you cannot attract the good people. And there's no good people, you cannot really do a good job to show that NGOs are capable. So you be trapped into that chicken egg situation. So we would like to break that circle. I think because also we have established ourselves in the circle, in the community, and we already got familiar to some of the funding agencies, so we are able to show things that significant things we can do or take responsibility for and make a difference on the ground. So just build the confidence as well.
But you also, I think, are unique, just to toot their horn a little bit. I mean, that there aren't that many Chinese grassroots NGOs that have scientists. I mean, like you guys. I mean, you have so much experience.
We have science background. We have also some people have business background.
How many people at Shanshui?
22 now.
22, which that's actually very big for. I mean, WWF has 30.
No, 100.
Oh, they have 100.
170.
Oh yeah, but in their Beijing office, I guess I'm thinking of. But you're almost bigger than some of the international NGOs, like Forest Trends. How many are you?
2 in Beijing.
All right. Yeah, it's okay. CF is 2 plus 2 interns.
I think IUCN might be 3 or 4.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you're operating, because you're an international NGO operating
No, I agree
in China.
completely with everything that Li Zhan said. Registration is very difficult, and last time we looked into it, I think only one of the international NGOs was actually legally registered in
as
China.
an NGO.
Yeah.
WWF. World WWF is registered as an NGO, and everybody else is registered as businesses. Or they're,
I think CI will get registered soon. Hopefully. Yeah.
We looked into it with having our mother-in-law for State Forest Administration and Ministry of Environment Protection most recently, and they seem to be willing, but the process is so difficult, and technically our staff are telecommuting from Washington, I guess. So it hasn't, to date, I can't say that it has affected our work so much, or maybe I just don't know how it's affected our work. Greenpeace is there. I don't think they're legally registered, but they're working there. I don't think it's been much of a problem, though I think every once in a while maybe when they might say something that the government is unhappy with, they might sort of get a little, well, you're not registered. But we have a very collaborative relationship with the State Forest Administration and some of the other government agencies. We sit down and do an annual planning process. What do we think we want to do this year with the government agency? And I think we have seen since the 6 or 7 years that we've been working in China, our collaboration with the government agencies has improved. I think they like some of the research that we promote. They think that we do fair analysis, not one-sided, but really analysis. And I think they appreciate that in some of the resources we've brought to China and the international experts we've brought over. So it's been good.
Well, sometimes I've heard international groups saying that if they register, like who they pick, they're concerned if who they pick as their popo, that may in the end kind of limit them. About, like if you were the State Forestry Bureau, then maybe you couldn't get NDRC and others to play with you, so to speak. And so that having these kind of amorphous registration, and we don't mean to say that all these groups are there illegally. I mean, actually Greenpeace does have some registration. It's okay. It started in I think it was Hong Kong, and they are there legal. I mean, it's not like we've got these illegal groups there. I mean, they're known that they're there, but the big concern is that there is the Ministry of Civil Affairs has, since I started at the Wilson Center almost 11 years ago, Ministry of Civil Affairs is saying, yes, we're working on registration rules for civil society groups and foundations, and it's not quite there yet. And I think that I think some of it is that maybe they see, well, it's still just kind of working. It's all ad hoc, and ad hoc kind of works. There's that. It's like a yoga. You're flexible.
You can operate, no problem, but you run into problems like a bank account locally or higher employment issues.
Yeah, and it does. We had a few weeks ago. We had Tim Hildebrandt and. We had two speakers here talking about, more from the research angle of NGOs, and my former assistant, Tim Hildebrandt, who looked at this issue in China in 3 different sectors, was saying that local governments often local NGOs sometimes don't register because it keeps them on friendlier relationship with local governments. So there's a lot of models out there. Do I have some other comments from here? Or can I unleash the creative inquisitiveness of the audience? Helen, you're up. Helen, and then Anna, and then Rongkun. Well, how about come up front to Anna and then Rongkun? We'll work our way back. Anna, either way. Rongkun, it's you.
My name is Rongkun Liu, and I'm from American University. I have 2 questions. The first one is about a little bit technical problems, like you mentioned. I've heard that there's a lot of financing issues, like with Chinese grassroots. I just wondering how you get funding from overseas. Donors. There might be some kind of problems. Like, I think previously I've heard some news like Oxfam. I think Oxfam in Hong Kong has been accused of supporting some kind of student groups like that, which have been criticized by Chinese government. So for the Chinese grassroots, if they received, I don't know if Shanshui has received any money from overseas donors, but if they've received, are there any channels that can facilitate this kind of funding from overseas, like foundations or something like that, if they are expressed interested in investing in Shanshui, something like that. Also, I have another question, for forest trend, if you want to operate some kind of project in China, so what's the criteria for you? Criteria for you to identify partners in China. Do you have any standards to what kind of partners that are ones that you are looking for, and what are criteria that you can identify which partners and what kind of project you are really interested in? So thanks.
Shanshui, we still receive a majority of our funding from overseas, and so far we haven't encountered any problem using that funding. And partially, the reason that money comes from overseas, not only because of the previous international cooperations we have established with funders from overseas, but it's also a lot of our work is experimental by nature, not yet scalable. So you have to find foundations who are willing to support that sort of test experimental approach. But China, you saw in Lu Zhi's presentation, a lot of private foundations newly set up. Supposedly, they can also support experimental kind of work, and they're learning pretty quick. So we're also working with some of these private foundations to look at how to set up a good way of supporting Chinese NGOs to be a good donor. And that, in a way, a lot of our international donors can play a very important role on that learning curve.
Is just to follow up on that local foundations. I mean, is there now a strong enough foundation law and regulation for these Chinese foundations, or is it all ad hoc still?
I understand that when they had no problem setting up these private foundations, but there was a recent regulation whereas they have to spend, was it 70%? 90% of the money that's used to set up the foundation. In their ways, it's 4 million Chinese yuan.
Okay.
So you can't.
The previous. They have to spend 70 to 90% of their previous revenue, last year's revenue, for as their budget to give out as grants. So that leaves very little room for the foundation itself to build their own capacity. So a lot of foundations had an issue there. I think the foundation laws in China is more restricted than the U.S. in many ways. So they are very careful on how they spend their money and looking for partners. So they complain that there aren't enough good projects to fund.
Yeah. Maybe because they're so new, they don't really have the network and the reputation. I mean, it's not like here where they're all online. You can go to the foundation center and search for all kinds, and records are all very transparent. And how do you know if you're an NGO? Is this foundation really going to give me money? And
some foundations having a hard time to give out money. The staff had to spend months to investigate a small NGO to be able to give out like 20,000 yuan grant. So the cost is very high for grant making. If you are serious, you're very careful about your money. But of course, there are many ways. We have actually we've been working with those foundations to helping them to set up a good portfolio of grantees and networking and provide advice. Although we haven't benefited much from those foundations yet.
You're generating good karma. We'll come back. Okay. Did you have some? There was a question towards you about.
Yeah, though on this question of funding, I think right now a lot of the donors that we've historically been involved with who have funded our work in China are saying, well, we would like to actually not fund you. You're an international NGO. We want to fund some national NGOs. So I'll put you in contact with.
All right. See, there's your good karma. It's coming right back at you there.
There you go. So I think that in many countries, when the skills and the staff are, when the skill set and local human capacity is not level, that's when the international NGOs might fill in a gap. But when China, places like China, Vietnam, there's the human capacity is so large that I think that there should be more focus on the domestic NGOs and building up their capacity, and maybe for some things like links to international issues, you can have partnerships with international NGOs, but I would much rather see the development of Chinese NGOs than have us go in there all the time.
Okay, Anna, you are the closing pitcher here.
Hi, I'm Anna Bertel from the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and I have a couple questions. I'm just curious about how Shanshui chooses its partners, and what's the process that you go through to integrate community participation in your projects? Do you go through certain organizations, or how do you set that up? And my other question is for Kristen about the definition of payments for environmental services. Is there an internationally recognized definition for this, or are the definitions all across the board in different countries? And how is the definition of PES in China different? I mean, I know you said that some of these projects were not defined as PES, but how do you define it? Did you have a set definition, and how does that differ from what you see in other countries?
Okay. Why don't we start with the Shanshui question about how do you integrate communities? And
maybe we should differentiate two kinds of projects. One is something like new concepts of, like, for example, we have a project called carbon, forestry, climate change community, because carbon reforestation under the CDM mechanism is new. So usually this kind of new initiatives, we will select some our old partner who already trust us and know what we are, how we do, and so we will try to do new initiatives with old partners in our old project area. But we also have some extension project, and for this we try to have a transparency process of selection partners. Transparency, that means we will use different channel, like we have a network of partnership. We also try to sometimes we even do advertisement. And for example, we have a project called Small Grants. We try to provide small grants to village leaders. Not only in small grants, but we also try to provide trainings and exchange companion with money. So for this kind of project, we will try to advise our program through local media, TV, and partner networking. So we will give us our standards and our project. They will apply. They give us applications.
Luger, did you have a final comment?
Yeah. So we have a growing base for network, growing network for partners. We also have now is building the structure of nodes. Larger grassroots NGOs, local like county level or prefecture level, even provincial level NGOs in between. So they serve as a supervisor for some of the smaller NGOs. So we give larger grants to these NGOs. We have a network of what we call 公社知青. It's hard to translate. 知青, like sundown students.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically, we have 4 groups of partners that we work with: government officials, local communities, researchers and academic people, and students, young students, volunteers, so who play different roles. Some provide a volunteer to us, some are partners to us. So we rely on these 4 groups of people to work. You see, like this earthquake relief work, you can quickly pull out some resources and people to work directly with communities is of our advantage. So direct connection with the local people.
But acting again, this glue function that they're doing. All right. Last comment from you. But
I was hoping no one would ask that question.
You almost made it. We were right at the wire
at the very end. There are some international definitions of PES. Sven Wunder from C-Force supposedly has the most accepted version, and his has 5 or 6 criteria. I can't reel them off right now. But if you went by just this narrow definition, there actually aren't all that many examples around the world. There are sort of, most examples have aspects, have 3 out of 5, have 2 out of 5. And I think when we look at payments for ecosystem services, we're looking for sort of contractual arrangements between parties, sort of involving direct payments from the provider of the service and someone who is willing to pay or can benefit from that ecosystem service. In China, it gets even more complicated because I think this word eco-compensation is sort of a broad term that's being used to describe programs and policies, some of which you might consider actually compensation for what might be some would consider regulatory taking. In other cases, it's a little bit more voluntary between municipalities. In some cases, it actually involves direct payments to individuals or households or communities. And in some cases, it's more of a sort of a framework that allows for fiscal transfers between provinces or municipalities or central and local government. So it's a very big basket of different things. And so when you go back to this $90 billion thing, it's like some of these things you can't actually quantify. If you go through the table that I was describing, there are so many in the one column on size, you just can't put a monetary value on it. So no, we definitely did not take the narrow definition of PES. But I think we were looking for, this is happening. There are a lot of these payment aspects happening, and this could be a basis for getting more market involvement in the future, which would bring in more resources.
Just to add a couple words, that what the problems I described by Christine is exactly what we want to trying to make up, which is the effectiveness of these payments. So when you have an input, you got to have some better defined outputs, even if it's not contractual relationship. But actually, we persuaded the Qinghai Forestry to engage a contractual process when they release the fund to, and it's contractual relation directly with the community, not only to the forestry departments in local level. So that's a little bit improvement. We'll see how it works, because our process tend to be very fine and a long time and a lot of transaction cost. But for government program, you have to simplify the model so they can apply it quickly and larger scale. We're still working on that. Yeah. How to adapt our model into the government. The model that could be applied directly by the government.
They don't want all this messy stuff.
Right.
Community is messy, and a lot of these, some of the ones that you had listed, I mean, I know some, they're very ad hoc, one-shot deals, which still is helpful, because a lot of them, particularly the water compensations, which, by the way, are illegal. I love it. Were reported a lot in the newspapers, and the Ministry of the Ministry of Water Resources and others are trying to use this to really push the law to change to have water rights. So it's like China, the Wild West of changes in the Wild West of payment for environmental services. All right. We're going to stop now. You have permission to gently tackle the people here. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank my speakers. And just note, for those of you in the room, that the email will go out this week. We're going to have a meeting on IGCC, kind of cleaner coal technology, on May 12th, U.S. and Chinese businesses working together. Thanks.